Hello and welcome to this episode of Futures, the podcast series brought to you by CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply.
Emma, how's it going? Long time.
It's been mega busy as usual. We've just had CIPS Futures Conference last week based in London. That was really great event where we launched the very first CIPS Global State of Procurement and Supply report. So really exciting, loads going on.
Fantastic. How did that go down? I'm sure that was very well received.
So yeah, loads of great takeaways. It's a brand new report from CIPS, loads of insights, packed full of insights, and loads of CPOs from global organisations have input into it. So it's an annual report that will come out, and then we've also got a pulse element from it that will be quarterly, and that will give people data on where those pinch points are in the supply chain. So price increases, shortages of supply, etc. So a really exciting project that we're delighted to launch last week.
Sounds great. And look, I guess for the annual CIPS Futures Conference, a great platform to launch such an important piece of research. And of course, the Futures Conference came straight off of the other important event, which was the graduation, right?
Yeah, graduation, Futures Conference. We shortlisted our awards. It's all going on. It's been a really busy summer.
It's all happening. I actually forgot about the awards. That's coming up. What are we looking forward to, or who are we looking forward to being featured in that annual awards ceremony in London?
Well, no spoilers from me, obviously, but we finished all the judging. There's some great organisations that have been awarded. We're looking out for some great candidates there.
Well, I was trying to get some more in-depth insights for the listeners from you, Emma, but I failed spectacularly. So
no spoilers here.
No spoilers at all. Well done, Emma. But it's quite topical because speaking of awards, in today's podcast, it's as it never is. It's never going to be you and me just chatting away. So we're actually delighted to welcome today's guest, who was recently awarded in the CIPS MENA Awards. He was recently awarded the CIPS MENA Leader of the Year. So today we have Sulaiman Abdulla, who's the director at the UAE Federal Tax Authority. Welcome, Sulaiman.
Thank you, Sam.
It's so great to have you on the podcast, Sulaiman. Great to speak to you. And as many people may know, Sulaiman is actually, I've known Sulaiman for many years. Great individual, fantastic procurement professional, great man. But for the purposes of Emma and everyone else who's listening, just do you want to start by introducing yourself? Tell everyone what your current role is and how did you get into the world of procurement? Where did you start?
Currently, I'm heading as a director of Administrative Affairs Department, managing the procurement and contracts and the facility management and the organization. Now, going back and asking myself how I had been in the procurement, I think most of the professionals in the industry will answer the same question, that it's by coincidence or by an opportunity they got. I still remember talking to my line manager years before, when I got the first opportunity to be in the procurement. I was asking him, can I have a training plan, at least for myself, because I have no experience in procurement? And he was telling me, you are a good hard worker, and you are fast learner. So I believe that you can do it. So I accepted that challenge.
Congratulations on your Leader of the Year award win, Sulaiman. I was delighted to be part of the judging process there, help facilitate that. We'll come more specifically onto procurement shortly, but just thinking about leadership as a whole, what does good leadership mean to you? What traits do you think are important for being a good leader?
If I summarize leadership in one word, I would say leadership is all about influence. Even John Maxwell has mentioned that in his book. But to give some elaboration about what leadership, I think leadership is the ability to influence others and the capacity to create new leaders, and also the ability to manage stress. Things are easier when things are good. Your leadership skills comes out when things are not in the right manner or in the good positions. So from practical perspective, leadership means for me creating change that drives strategy. It also includes, building trust and authenticity with others, and support and manage change as well. But let's ask ourselves a question: if leadership can be taught or not? And obviously, the answer is yes, we can teach leadership. But why not everyone become a leader? Why only we see few great leaders exist where leadership can be taught? And I think, what the answer would be that leadership requires sacrifices, commitment, and dedication. And you don't see that from most of the people. And Simon Sinek has mentioned it very correctly, and he said that leadership is not about only attending a short courses for 2 days or 1 week and you become leader. Leadership requires more than that. So going back to the leadership and leaders, why some are leaders and others are not? And we talked about some of the key elements that leadership requires sacrifice and commitment. However, I always emphasize this point. To become a good leader, you don't need to know everything, or you don't need to be an expert in everything. But to be a good leader, you need to know a bit of everything in order to lead change. Some of the key elements or points of a good leader, Emma, I think the first one is leader should be visionary. I mean, he has to have a vision, long-term vision with a great, meaningful purpose and goals. Goals you can cascade it to long-term goals or short-term goals. So you always need to have a vision and lead that vision. Now, emphasizing on the vision, I always tell leaders that you need to manage your time. Don't go to the micromanagement because you are a leader. So you kind of need to zoom in, zoom out based on the situation that you have. However, 80% of your time should be about how to lead the organization to next level, and 20% maybe how to manage your operation. A second important part as a leader, I think communication skills. Warren Buffett has mentioned it, I think, in one of his podcast maybe or article. He said, "If I can leave you with one point to develop in yourself, it's all about communication and communication and communication." So communication is very important, communication skills. But when we're talking about the communication skills, we're not talking about how good talker you are. Communication skills requires listening skills, requires writing skills, require presentation skills, require active listening, analyzing. So there are so many skills required for you to become a good communicator. The third one, I think this is one of the good example I can give about responsibility and accountability. Basically, an ownership. In one of the podcasts I was listening, it was given an example about an employee who takes an ownership and an employee doesn't take an ownership. Simply, if you can give a task to one employee and telling him to finish it, he can simply send an email to other party and says that I did my job. So if you next day you come to him and he said, what happened to the task? He just drop an email as a follow-up and he will tell and come back to you and saying that I did my task. So where the other employee take the ownership to complete the task and find the way. So I think as a leader, you need to find ways to solve problems. And that happens when the leader has high level of responsibility and accountability. Another very important element and attribute for a leader is integrity. If you have a good leader, check box in all the skills and doesn't have an integrity, you have nothing. So integrity comes in a high, skill set and attributes that require to be in the leader. Resilience. COVID-19, I believe, really gave us a real examples on how we need to be flexible and adapt to change. Problem solving is another element, and I think what makes leadership different is how he can solve problems and that sharp his experience. Now let's face the fact you cannot solve all the problems. That's why it's very important to engage with other leaders. I always push people to read books and engage with the professional communities where you can listen to other people's how they solve the problems. So you can now have different experiences plus to your experience. Last part from my perspective is emotional and social intelligence. I always say this, 90% of the problems can be solved with a cup of coffee. But to do that, you need to have a good level of skills when it comes to emotional and social intelligence. Emotional intelligence, basically understanding your emotions, what triggers them, and how to control them and how to react. Same thing, understanding others people's emotions, how to control, how to react. When it comes to social intelligence, it's basically how you are managing and maintaining and building relationship. So if you are leveling up in your experience going up, you need to understand that two are very critical skills to adapt and learn are emotional and social intelligence, where you need them to solve problems.
I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with you on that last point, particularly about, I think as a leader, it's important to engage in relationships at all levels as well. And having that emotional and social intelligence, as you put it, I think is critical. Another point you made, which I really liked, and somebody said this years and years ago, and it's kind of stayed with me, is that good leaders surround themselves with good people who perhaps even know more or have more knowledge of some things than you do yourself, and to be able to have that ability as a leader to realize you don't have all the answers, like you say, Sulaiman, but you have the right people in your team with the right skills to fill those gaps, and then you are there to orchestrate it. I think that's really something that some leaders would perhaps fall down on, in not having the confidence to actually come out and say, I don't know it all, but my team do.
Indeed, Emma.
No, I think excellently articulated. There's so many facets to leadership, and I think you've captured them correctly, especially the last one with the social intelligence that aligns with emotional intelligence. But it's interesting. I mean, obviously, we're talking procurement here. Are there any differences in the traits and the skills required by a leader in a holistic context to the traits and requirements of a procurement leader, especially in this day and age where really we're talking about a specific profession or skill, and we're trying to look towards the future. Are there different skills that a procurement leader needs or not?
The traits I have mentioned as a good leader, it can be applied and it should be applied as a procurement leader. However, when it comes to procurement leader specifically, I think because of the nature of the responsibility that the procurement leader has, you need to have a different leadership styles, I would say always, because leadership is not about you using one style and applying it in every situation. So I use the term situational leadership. Sometimes you need to be firm, sometimes you need to show empathy, sometimes you need to gather the people and take the buy-in if you would like to drive change. So leadership should be situational, especially for procurement leader, because their role is so complicated.
I guess for our listeners out there, some may be aspiring leaders or the future leaders. Can you give us an example of where you've driven some change in procurement or supply chain as a leader, and some of these skills that you've talked about? How have you used them in practice?
I'll give an example about in one of the organization I was working, leading implementation of a supplier portal, particularly, the e-invoicing services or workflow or the systems for the suppliers. I'll give a summary about the challenge and the problem that, usually you see the suppliers uploading the invoices before implementing the system. The invoices are manual. Okay, let's come and implement the systems. What we found that in the organization, the system was available. It requires an implementation with some changes in the workflow and the systems. However, because of the people from different departments, used to do or perform a task in a certain way, they resist to adopt and accept new systems. And what they have mentioned to me that we cannot use the system unless it is being replicated as is as the current process. I said it is wrong methodology that when you see your current manual processes and you are trying to automate that process and as is, leverage the capabilities in the systems and think out of the box, maybe we can enhance the process. However, they said it's not possible because the resolution says it should be signed. I mean, one of the features of the process that they would like to apply a signed, accepted invoice instead of electronic approval. Then I had to go through reading the whole policy of procurement. I think almost 130 and 140 pages to find out, let's say in a different way, a gap, how to overcome this challenge about signing or EN approval. Then I found the sentence where in the policy doesn't mention signature, it mentioned an approval. So I built a case with the concerned department. I mean, it was an audit team and finance team. I said, okay, it's not mentioning signature, it's mentioning an approval. So why not we use an e-approval? Then the answer was, we used to do this process for years and years. Changing it can trigger an audit point. At the end, I put on the table that I need to implement this system because the debate that we are going through is not realistic. I mean, we are talking about a leadership vision of implementing automation in the process. And they told me under one condition that somebody has to take accountability and responsibility and risk of validating these invoices and approving it. And I have taken that. So I was like a person who's just validating all the invoices for almost, I think, 2 years. And after that, I built a case about the value that we got. And I think it's a time to shorten the process of invoicing by removing myself from the process. So if I summarize some of the key things I think as a leader need to be addressed is your communication skills. So I think I have tried to apply the communication skills by communicating to other departments. You need to convince people and influence their decisions by, I always say this, you start with common sense, then go deep. Start asking general questions. My favorite question always why. As Simon said, always ask about whys, and you will find some good answer about it. Solving problems helped in implementing these systems. So again, as a procurement professionals, you are not only managing your work, but you are there solving problems or bringing a value to your organizations. And you need to be, resilient and flexible to change. If they're saying it's possible and you're saying it's not possible, you need to understand that to come into middle ground, but ensuring that you implementing the system. I'm talking about digital transformation here. At the end is, emotional and social intelligence. I knew the fear of using the new systems. Here comes, I think, some bold decisions that as a procurement leader you take with the highest responsibility and accountability, because you have a vision and you believe on the value that this system can bring. So you took that decision by putting yourself in the middle of the process to validate everything, in order. It's like part of change management.
Sulaiman, that's great. And look, speaking to you over the years, I'm always impressed by that passion you have for leadership and for procurement. That always shines through with all your responses. And I'm interested, we've had this conversation quite a few times about where you see the role and responsibility of procurement going forward. And you always focus on the fact that procurement has to ultimately add value. Talk to me a little bit about that. What do you mean by that?
Now let's talk about the history of procurement a little bit. I think in the history of procurement, the focus had shifted from purchasing to procurement. And post COVID-19, I think it's time to rebrand procurement to value, Sam. Like, for example, Institute of Procurement and Value. Institute of Procurement and Supply Value, Institute of Procurement and Supply Value Management. What I'm saying is, I think it's time to rebrand procurement function and add the element of value towards it, so we can lead the change of mindset of procurement professionals. I keep insisting and say this, especially to my team and any procurement professional I meet, that we are an agent of change and we are an agent of value. So your value is not about how many PRs or POs you have created. No, your value is about how many problems you solve, for example, how many advices you give to our stakeholders to speed up their processes, how many decisions you have taken to simplify the process. So the value of procurement is not only about cost, and there's so many values. We are just gonna name it about like innovations and risk management, and even bringing certain ideas. Sustainability, for example, is one of the important value procurement can lead in the organization. So I think it's time, Sam, for procurement to rebrand its name from procurement to value, because procurement is adding value, is not anymore about cost. And we have seen that a real example in COVID-19.
Now it's time for our ever popular I'm Not Buying It segment, Sulaiman, and this is where we give our guests a light grilling on something that we perhaps need a bit more convincing on for them to argue their case. So speaking about changing the brand of procurement, that's fascinating. I really like that. You speak about creating trust with stakeholders through building your own personal brand and sharing your achievements to get buy-in. But how do you build a personal brand, like a real authentic personal brand, without it looking like it's over the top or looking a bit superficial? How do we do this in a really authentic way?
Emma, you have already mentioned, I think the key word here is authenticity. And that authenticity doesn't come, from my perspective, unless you have a meaningful purpose in life. So you need to have a meaningful purpose, and you need to have goals below that purposes. It can be a financial stability, it can be goals related to your social health, it can be goals related to your mental health. So these goals, it can be a long term or short term goals. You can set and you can work on that. However, authenticity, because people will feel it, authenticity, you cannot build that without having a really meaningful purpose. This is one, I think. Now, why we are building this a personal brand? And I think as a human beings, we naturally seek endorsement and acceptance from others. I always emphasize and talks about this to leaders, that in order to lead change, most often people seek acceptance, especially if you are new leaders. If you have good knowledge, who are you, how you are going to lead. So creating that personal brand of yourself and taking it to drive change is very important, because people needs to start building that trust with you. Now, that takes us to a second question. I always say this. You can have your personal brand and you stay there. So how you build that trust with people? People, I use this phrase always: we do what we say and we say what we do. So people will need to see the value of the personal brand in the ground as an action. And as a procurement leader, action means we are trying to solve problems of our stakeholders and bring value. Some of the stakeholders, for them, value is speed. So I'm talking to them about speed. Some of them talks about quality. So I talks about quality. Some of them talks about compliance. So I talks to them about compliance. So building trust for them when they see someone is working his personal brand is what value you are bringing to the organization. Now, as a person, when you are building a personal brand, for people to trust you, I always recommend that you focus on four areas, not only on your personal level, but organizational level and national level and also community level. That's where you are really building an authentic leader. That's you're not thinking about yourself, but you're taking your brand to contribute in your organization and your community and your country.
I mean, I wholeheartedly support that, Sulaiman. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's that authentic leadership that becomes the most important thing for leaders, and especially procurement leaders, who find themselves in that very interesting spot. So, in addition to brand, I mean, building up that personal brand, that procurement brand. If there's one skill that you would say that a leader or an aspiring leader needs to hone, that needs to really perfect in order to get their seat at the top table and to stay there, what one skill would you say that is?
If I giving a choice to say just only one skill, I think communication and solving problem skills. It's very important for a leader to understand and learn how to solve problems and able to communicate, the results. So communication skills and solving problem skills. However, you cannot be good in these two skills unless you have a good level of social and emotional intelligence skills, because at the end it's not one way of communication, because you need to interact with other people. But for people who are listening also, some of the good skills I also, or formulas, or I also would like to share is always apply, each one teach one formula. Whatever you learn, you try to share that to with others, because at the end, you are not alone in this journey. You need to create those agents of value from different departments who can support you on whatever journey you're going. So if you are leading a change, it's very important for you to create those agents of value or agents of change, as I mentioned this. Meaningful goals is very important. You need to have a meaningful purpose and goals. It's a meaningful. Don't link your purpose for any materialistic things. Try to get a meaningful purpose in life, meaningful goals. Believe me, you will see yourself heading to different levels, because you see it as an infinite game. So you're going and going and trying to add values. And I think this is for everyone, even myself. And I use a phrase to push me. I always say this: if you are doing the same job in the same way for more than a 3 month, you are not improving. So literally, I'm telling myself and my team that it pushes you to think out of the box and takes out you from the comfort zone. This is the key word. Is the key sentence is: don't stay in a comfort zone. Believe me, the more you stay in a comfort zone and you don't face challenges, your brain, your body will not help you after years, even if you wish to move away from the comfort zone. So the moment you see there's a comfort zone, push yourself, go away from the comfort zone, face challenges. You might fail, but at the end, in the long run, you will gain and you will succeed.
Suleiman, it's always a pleasure listening to you. And I'm sure there's been lots of nuggets of advice for those looking to climb that ladder and also those who are looking to stay there. So thanks very much for sharing those bits of wisdom on procurement leadership and lots of other things. It's been a real pleasure. And of course, once more, Suleiman, obviously I was there on the evening, and it was more than a pleasure to hand that award over to you. Congratulations again on being awarded the CIPS MENA Leader of the Year. Hugely deserved congratulations. Really was a fitting accolade.
Thank you, really, Sam.
And Suleiman, do you want to tell everyone about the fantastic cake that your family bought you in recognition of being
Oh,
MENA Leader of the Year?
That's really was a surprise. I mean, they were so happy about being recognized as a leader of the year, and I think, I always say this one element to lead as myself, in the highest moment, I consider that as a highest moment. In the highest moments, you need to stay humble. I mean, whatever awards and excellence you get, it's not because of you, it's a blessing of God and the people who really supported you directly or indirectly. So I would like to thank Sam and all your team and CIPS MENA for the great event, really, and how you managed it. And we'll do our best, to uplift procurement function next level.
Fantastic, Sulaiman. Brilliant.
Thanks, Sulaiman.
So that's it for this episode of Futures. For any new listeners out there, be sure to check out our previous episodes and don't forget to follow, rate and review the podcast if you've been enjoying the episodes so far.
This podcast has been brought to you by CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. For more information on CIPS, head over to cips.org, where you can find out about our up-and-coming events, excellent training opportunities, and download our brand new report, The Global State of Procurement and Supply. For now, though, that's it from us. See you next time.